This month's Where Did the Road Go is sponsored by Tim, Allison Cook, Super Inframan, Stephen St. George, and Lindsay Trebet. Thank you for making this show possible. And if you would like to help support the show, check out www.wheredidtheroadgo.com and click on the Patreon link. It's only $3 a month, and you get extra content all month long.
Transmission start. Welcome to Where Did the Road Go? Join us as we wander off the path and explore lost history, consciousness, the paranormal, unexplained mysteries, alternative thought, and much more. We are present on the web at wheredidtheroadgo.com. Now here is your host, Soraya.
Welcome to this edition of Where Did the Road Go? And tonight I have with me Christopher Ernst.
Hello.
Taylor Bell.
Hey.
And Super Inframan, or Saxon, either one.
Or Saxon. Hello.
And tonight we're going to do the first ever public AMA show. We've done them for Patreons before, but I thought, well, let's just ask on, all the different social medias that Where the Road Go has and collect some AMA questions from listeners. And we got some good ones. We got some very good ones. So, where to start? There was one actually for Chris, and I wanted to start with that. That came from Matt in Delaware. And he said, I've been thinking about The Shining and how in many ways it's a movie about liminality. The hotel's transition to winter, being on the boundary between civilization and wilderness, the frontier history, and stealing the land from Native Americans. Jack's character and his past alcoholism and abuse, Danny is an outcast with mental abilities, etc. Do you think Kubrick knew about this concept and made a movie about liminality? What are your thoughts on this idea and any other ideas on the meaning of Kubrick's message?
Yeah, it's funny. I think there was Steven Snyder, Recluse, just did a show on The Farm about Kubrick, and he was talking about some of these things. So you might want to check that out too, Matt. But that's a great question. I'm not a Kubrick scholar by any stretch, but I do know a little bit about him and his work, and I have my own personal feelings on it. There's a ton of conspiracy stuff around Kubrick, and everything from like Dr. Strangelove. He found out secrets, government secrets, and then when he was working on 2001, NASA approached him, and of course, the whole moon landing thing. They asked him to shoot basically a fake moon landing. But as some people might not know, it wasn't necessarily in place of it. It was in case things didn't go right, which very well could have happened. That, and
I also feel like they may have done that to not show the Soviets all our technology.
Oh, completely. Yeah. Smoke and mirrors. I would absolutely not put that, past the CIA or, the government at that point. But anyway, this idea that somehow Kubrick was, in the know, and that he reflected a lot of the secret knowledge that he had through his movies, including up through Eyes Wide Shut, which was, some sort of expose on the Illuminati. And so The Shining in particular, a lot of the sort of theories that go around that, there's this documentary called Room 237, which deals with a lot of these, and there are several of them, including, there's this symbolism that, it's about Native American massacre. I'm trying to remember what you guys have seen that, Taylor and Saxon. Yeah. What are the other two narratives that are in that? Blank.
Well, there's the Apollo stuff.
The Apollo stuff.
Yeah.
Like with Danny's shirt.
Yeah.
And some other things like that.
Yeah. That he's secretly trying to tell people, signal that he, this is a confession that he did the moon landing.
Right. There's also the flashes that happen at certain timed intervals throughout the movie.
Right. Now, here, my personal feeling on this is, I think a lot of the sort of quote unquote evidence of the links that would make this, make sense are sort of tenuous to me. And I feel like in terms of it being like a literal confession, or there's some sort of like real secret message or cipher that's going on in his films. And, you know, this is just maybe my perspective as a filmmaker, but I think you're dealing much more with, you know, symbolic territory that may or may not be conscious. I think, you know, some of these things might be unconscious artistic gestures that, you know, he's making. I mean, you know, if you read any of his biographies, including the sort of famous one by Vincent LaBruto, you know, he talked about he was a really, you know, he's really concerned with the image. He was a photographer before this and a journalist, and this idea of the pure image and, you know, something being communicated through symbols and through, you know, even, you know, like taking in something like Roland Barthes' ideas of, you know, the photograph and the punctum, which is, you know, about the special aura of the photograph. I think that he was really concerned with that stuff, and he was very well read and really well versed in symbolism. And I think some of that stuff, you know, can come out almost automatically as a filmmaker is trying to find what's right. I mean, you know, case in point, you know, there's these stories that came out, I think, you know, about 10 years ago of how he created like the psychedelic Stargate effects at the end of 2001. You know, he was spending, you know, 24 hours, you know, straight in this loft in downtown Manhattan, mixing chemicals, you know, with a camera, shooting it overhead, trying to get just the right look. And like people wouldn't go into the room because it smelled so horrendous because of all these weird chemicals. And, you know, he's probably doing brain damage, but it's that kind of like, you know, it's almost like visionary, you know, it makes me think of Austin Osman Spare, or, you know, the idea of the muses, like something is kind of like speaking through him. And, you know, that's a lot less concrete an answer as to say, well, you know, he met this person and had, you know, had this experience, therefore he knew about this and, you know, was, you know, secretly saying something. So I think there's some of that going on in his films. But then, you know, there might be stuff that he knows that he was doing a wink and a nod for sure. You know, if he was in with the quote unquote Illuminati, and I don't really mean the Illuminati, but, you know, people in power that have secrets, and there are many of them, just not necessarily the ones you think. He very, very well could have been, you know, like a wink and a nod stuff. Like the other, you know, people talk about Clockwork Orange being, you know, a sort of some sort of soft hint towards MK Ultra that he knew about. And, you know, maybe he talked to Gottlieb. Maybe they got drunk together and, you know, Gottlieb told him everything that was going on. Who knows?
Interesting. All right.
And if I could kind of chip in here on this.
Yeah, please. Anybody else? I'm certainly not the authority.
I'm a huge fan of the movie The Shining, but also the book by Stephen King, which is pretty different from the movie. I mean, obviously there's a lot of similarities. You know, the story kind of at its heart is pretty much the same, but there are elements of it that Kubrick almost flipped completely. Like things like what, you know, the ultimate fate of the hotel, for instance, or sort of what happens at the end of the movie. I mean, are we in spoiler territory for this, or?
I think it's fair game at this point.
Okay.
Yeah.
So at the end of the movie, Jack Torrance freezes to death. There's sort of, you know, it's this very cold winter, and they have this kind of moment of catharsis at the end when he's, you know, outside and dead. Whereas in the book, they actually make the entire hotel explode. There's something involving the boiler room.
Boiler room, yeah.
Yeah, there's little shifts like that seem very deliberate and seem, you know, artistic or symbolic in some way. I agree. I don't think they're necessarily, you know, super secret coded messages and everything. But I think that he, in general, had an awareness of artistic presence and really carried that through in a lot of his works, where, you know, and it reminds me a lot of David Lynch. And when you mentioned the like psychedelic light color stuff at the end of 2001, it reminded me of the sort of famous Part 8 of Twin Peaks: The Return, which has sort of a crazy sequence in it. And likewise, you know, what I've heard about that is that Lynch essentially locked himself in a room for like whatever, a day and a half, and didn't come out until it was done. And it was all, doing stuff with chemicals and smoke and like particles and all kinds of different things to kind of come up with this sort of artistic representation of like both,
they're doing what is called structural materialist filmmaking, and it is it's
interesting.
It's very interesting. Like you're completely right, and I think that the both of them are working in similar veins too, in terms of having their Lynch is much more cognizant, I think, of the visionary aspect of his filmmaking. He talks about doing his meditation and trying to reach down for the big fish,
right? Yep.
The deep, infinite unconscious, and I think that that's a good. Yep.
Two things there. Stephen King hated that version of The Shining.
He did.
And two, freezing to death is a much cheaper scene than blowing up a hotel.
That is true. That is true. Along with the fact too that I really think that a lot of Kubrick's changes had to do with his sort of, his outlook on life. He has a much more a nihilistic outlook, and I think a much more misanthropic outlook than Stephen King does. And like in the book, Jack Torrance is almost, he's a sympathetic character. He's a alcoholic father who's trying to do his best, but he's basically dealing with addiction. And that was one of the big reasons why King hated it, is that Kubrick changed it, and it ended up becoming very different in terms of those dynamics and the father-son dynamics.
Yeah. All right. Let's jump on to one of the next questions, or we're going to end up doing an entire show on Kubrick, which some people probably wouldn't mind.
I was about to say, I bet people would like that.
Yeah.
You don't have to apologize. So this one comes from Frank Earl, and this is a really interesting question when I started to think about it. With vanishing evidence and alleged cover-ups by the authorities in mind, what exactly would you do if you happened across a dead cryptid? And the more I thought about it, the more I'm like, what can you do? Because if someone really wants to erase your evidence, they're going to do it. Like when it really comes down to it, if you find a dead cryptid, you go to the news. If the authorities want to get rid of that, A, they can come take it. B, they can, marginalize you as being a crackpot or something like that. Like it's going to end up being a situation where you're like, I had this thing and now I don't have it anymore. Or, I don't think there's an easy answer to how to get that evidence out there if someone in power wants it to disappear.
Yeah, that's a hell of a question.
I mean, because even if you went on the news, first of all, isn't going to believe you right away.
Right.
And
there's plenty of time for them to, try to fact check you somehow, which turns into contacting people that are in official capacities that would shut it down.
And if you just post it on YouTube, I mean, all it is video.
Yeah, yeah.
So I guess I have a response to this question that may be, I don't know, unpopular or not necessarily the direction you guys are thinking, but if I ran into a dead cryptid out in the woods somewhere, let's just say Bigfoot for sake of ease.
Yeah, that's fine.
I would probably, say some sort of prayer or like last rites, and then try to pay respects and leave.
Interesting.
That's probably the best idea, Taylor. Because as I've been sitting here thinking about the question, I'm like, okay, well, I've found a dead deer in the woods before and things like that, but it wouldn't be the same thing. It also wouldn't be like finding a human's body out in the woods.
Right.
There would probably be that weird sense of being in liminal space or Oz effect just by virtue of seeing this thing, whatever cryptid you want to pick out. And so I think responding with awe and respect to its place that makes a lot of sense to me.
But eat its flesh and take its power.
Well, there you go.
We can do that too. Well, after you say the prayer.
Oh, we're also assuming that there are government agencies that would want to keep Bigfoot hidden, and maybe there are.
True.
But I mean, who knows? It might just be that no one's ever had good enough evidence,
Mm-hmm.
So we're I guess the question is being asked on the assumption of the powers that be don't want this stuff. No.
Mm-hmm.
So my first response, or my first like gut instinct was, you know, some kind of or last rites. My second one was, you could also take some sort of a tissue sample and try to test it in a lab.
Yeah.
So I don't know what that says about me, but
No, I thought that too. I just don't think there's any easy answer to that. If someone wants it covered up, it's going to be covered up.
Oh yeah.
well, it depends on what your goal is. You know, I mean, I don't think you can walk away from a situation like that with the goal of proving its existence, unless, I mean, you know, unless there, you know, wasn't some grand conspiracy to keep it secret and you were able to whatever, get it in ice or whatever. But
right. Well, you know, you bring up an interesting point with that too, Taylor, because I don't think for us, the listeners of the show, folks like that, are as concerned with like, I need somebody to verify that this exists for me. We've already accepted it in some way or other, and we don't need, you know,
scientific acceptance.
Yeah, the Department of Agriculture to tell us that yes, this is real. You know.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. Well, so this was a sort of connected question. Well, and this one came from, I lost the page. Hang on. Jimmy Eaker. And he says, Tim is a Pennsylvania guy and researcher. In the 60s and 70s, UFO sightings and Bigfoot type encounters went together. What's the possibility that's actually the government protecting creatures, which I think are primitive men? I'd never thought of that possibility before. I don't think that's what the connection between UFOs and Bigfoot are. I think it's just that you're dealing with, I mean, my personal feeling is that both of these things are a paranormal representation of something, not a physical creature. But if it is a flesh and blood creature, I mean, it's not impossible that the UFO sightings are actually our craft protecting them, getting them out of places, or they've escaped from somewhere and they're bringing them back.
I see. Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely fall on the paranormal side on Bigfoot too, but I've seen discussions years back about, you know, if you found out there was a very sophisticated hominid, you know, does he have the same rights as we do?
Right.
You know, if he is cognizant, self-aware, all these things. And so how do you keep a small population like that from being abused and hunted down or whatever else? And so it's like, okay, that does, there's some logic behind the idea of, if this is a real creature, we're trying to keep it protected, and the best thing we can do for it is to say they don't exist. And if people say they've seen one, we say you're crazy. That way other people don't go looking for it. Right.
So, and I mean, the idea of it being a primitive man is not out of the question either. You know, something, a different evolutionary line of man.
Yeah. Well, just to add to that, we keep finding more and more
sub races.
That have lived alongside of us the last decade or so. I mean, it's kind of crazy.
That is absolutely true. Glenn Davis asks, would you consider doing a live show from the Scary Barn? I don't know what that would achieve, but I mean, it's not out of the question. I mean, maybe the next time, like Chris or Saxon are here, we can do a short.
Scary Barn's scary.
It is. I'd have to clean it up a little bit so we can get in there and easily do this and make sure we have reception. But other than that, I mean, it might be interesting to do a short bit from the Scary Barn.
No, I think that could be cool.
Yeah.
I don't have a lot of weird stuff with that barn. It's the big barn that's not scary that all the weird stuff happens in.
So what makes the Scary Barn scary?
It just looks like the Amityville house.
Yeah, it's an appearance. Okay.
Yeah,
it's aesthetically very very spooky.
And it's not in great shape too, so that also adds to sort of the spooky, like it's this abandoned sort of barn that almost looks like it has a face on it.
Oh.
Nice.
Arthur Parvati says, what is actually haunted? The location where paranormal events happen, or the people who experience them? And I would say both to some degree. I think the one connection in the paranormal is us. And I think everything else are factors. Like there are some areas that are more likely to have, you know, where people are going to experience stuff. There are time periods where people are more likely to experience stuff. environmental factors, all kinds of stuff.
Objects.
But yeah, exactly. But I think the key factor is always us. So
Definitely.
Yeah.
which is why it's not unusual for people to have a large, varied amount of weirdness in their life.
But I also think too that like we are not as separate from our environment as we think.
Oh no,
either.
Absolutely not.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, and that it's like, in fact, you really have to think of it as being completely connected, even if you cannot see those connections. So there's like always some sort of not feedback loop. There's always some sort of conversation going on, for lack of a better term.
Right. I think I've heard Sarai mention this too, or on the show, with the idea that some people are just better receivers of information that are out there.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't matter if it's something we regard as anomalous, or, if there are certain things we might even think of as physical, getting more into some of the cryptid stuff, like just because you're a better receiver, you're going to pick up on the information of where you are. So you might see the Loch Ness Monster, or if you go in this house, you might have a ghostly experience when people that have been there, the day before didn't.
Oop, I think we lost him.
Oh, did you lose me?
Oh,
Oh, no, you're here.
it sounded like your word cut off.
Oh, sorry. I think that was just my accent.
I think, yeah, I mean, when you have someone who's already sensitive and they go into a location that might have the right environmental factors, like using the idea of the stone tape theory, for instance, I think that person's far more likely to see something or hear something than someone who has never really had an experience.
Sure. And that's not to say that there aren't, discarnate entities of some sort that, that can't be someplace too, that might be either there because of circumstance or because of because they're drawn to the spot. And then, us who are living here in the, conscious of the physical world could be interacting, those that might have psychic abilities might be more sensitive to that. So I think it's this whole, it's like I always use the term ecosystem that keeps on happening, that's going on.
Yeah. Well, and it seems to be sort of an ecosystem that's sort of centered around consciousness and around the interactions between consciousness and place or matter or other energies, I guess.
I think that's it. Yeah.
I was just going to say something. Place and yep, gone. All right, cool. Anyone else have anything to say about this? Like, take that as a no. Okay, let's move on to another question. Okay, so who is this? This is from Good at Wine, and they had a few questions, so let's hit a couple of these. Some of these are pretty simple. Has Steph Young written anything recently, and can she come back? I would love to know the answer to that question myself. About a year ago, she wrote me and was all excited that she wanted to come back on the show, and then I didn't get any more responses from her. So I've written her a number of times. The phone number I had for her doesn't work anymore. I have no idea what's up. So I haven't spoken to her in over a year at this point, and I hope she's okay. And maybe if she's listening to this, she'll drop me a message. Because if nothing else, I'd like to at least know she's doing okay. But,
absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, people ask me that all the time. What's up with Steph? And I honestly don't know, because like I said, the last I heard, she wanted to come back on the show and she wanted to talk about all this stuff, and then nothing. So then he says, what does everyone think of Corey Goode and his lawsuits and his impact on the UFO community in general, along with David Wilcock? Good or bad, they've had a large influence and changed the game in UFO and paranormal circles. I know you've addressed this before, but you were quite brief about it, and I think there's a subject that deserves a deep dive. I think we've been brief about it because I don't know that there's much there.
I mean, I certainly, if they're talking about sort of the impact it's had on sort of furthering this, weird trickster conspirituality, new age, industry that seems to be, I think kind of hypnotizing and conning a lot of people out of money and making them do dangerous things. I think that he certainly is, been a part of that.
Yeah.
And but yeah, I mean, I don't know. To me, it doesn't seem any different than like Gary Spivey. People don't know who that is.
No.
He's the
Heard the name
psychic.
before.
He's the psychic with the chia head, you know, or
Oh, okay.
you know, what, or I'm trying to think of something that, you know, I mean, most of these people I'm thinking of, some person has had some positive experience with, so I don't want to discount that. But, you know, it seems to me it's like self-help guru kind of thing. It's that it's very much getting into that space of, you know, I'm going to sell you some sort of secrets I have to life that are going to either give you an explanation for why things are the way they are, or it's going to give you something to hang on to that's going to give you hope. And in the meanwhile, I'll take money.
Yeah.
And you find that in so many different places, not just
Completely.
in the paranormal,
Completely.
business,
Yep.
everywhere.
Yep.
So, and as far as like their stories and stuff, they're clearly kind of ridiculous. And I don't think that helps people outside the UFO field take the subject any more seriously, because they see stuff like the blue avians and stuff like that. And they're like, oh, yeah, this stuff's crazy. Okay. Yep. UFOs are nonsense.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is interesting. I mean, it kind of, I don't know, it sort of bleeds into the sort of like Robert Anton Wilson idea of like not taking it too seriously and the sort of kind of chaos of it. But it's unfortunate. It's unfortunate that there are people out there like that who are putting their material out there to try to, you know, either get people's money or get people believing some kind of, you know, blue chicken story.
Yeah. Well, it's all about the money in the end. I mean, that was all worked through Gaia, the TV station there.
Yeah.
Who are not exactly.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, who are not
say
exactly bastions of truth.
Yeah. I mean, it's an interesting sort of like the history of Corey Goode, if nobody's familiar with it, is, and correct me if I'm wrong, if anybody knows, but he was kind of like, he came out of the forums in like the late 90s, early to mid, maybe it was more to like the mid-aughts or something like that. But as far as I know, he was a lurker. Maybe he was like working with other people, but it might have been Bill Ryan's forum. Bill Ryan, who originally him and Carrie Cassidy had this site called Project Camelot. And, you know, they were pushing a lot of very specific, you know, types of narratives out of there. Bill Ryan was the guy who had sort of broken the Serpo narrative, and you know, they really were behind Dan Burrish, if people remember. I'm getting deep into sort of like UFO history now, bad UFO history, but yeah. And Corey Goode, if I remember correctly, he was kind of like lurking on those forums and started hinting at this, you know, secret that he had, but you know, some people were suspicious of him, and there was a lot of like drama coming out of there. But for what people felt is that, you know, whether or not he did have some background in, you know, psyops or whatever, I mean, so many things have been thrown out there. You know, he was lurking on these forums, basically collecting information, you know, reading in the same way that any person who's pulling a con would, collecting information, the narratives, you know. You read enough, you listen to enough people talking about stuff, then you're going to be able to come up with a narrative that, you know, kind of works in the same way. And it just took off from there.
You know, I have a real problem with stuff like this because I kind of equate it to religious leaders abusing their followers.
Sure.
Because so much of this is sort of taken on faith, right? So I draw a parallel there, and you know, a lot of times, particularly, this is something I feel much more about religion, is like I don't care what you believe, life is hard, and if this is what helps you get through it, that's awesome.
Right.
And you know, some of the stuff with the paranormal and what have you, kind of, I don't want to call it a secular version of that, but you know, there's something there, and I don't like that to be abused.
Yeah.
I'm with you completely. I think it's rife for it though, and it always has been. I mean, there's always been this, you know, that's how religion got started, maybe. I think.
Yeah. Well, that's why it's important, you know, with any of this stuff, but really with, you know, most things, to try to be discerning and try to ask good questions.
Yes. Indeed.
Yeah.
So in that sense, it is important. Yeah.
And I remember what I was going to say earlier. When it comes to people having paranormal experiences, our senses don't block out, but they treat like 90% of what we perceive at any given time as unimportant. So it doesn't even tell you, hey, this is there, because it doesn't matter. Your brain goes, this is not important information. So I think psychic comes down to somebody's brain going, well, maybe this is important, versus most people's brain who goes, yeah, that's not important. That's not going to help you in any way.
Right. I like that a lot. Actually, I don't have my comment there. I lost it.
All right. That happens. I know all about that. So A Good at Wine continues with, building on that last question, why do you think so many in ufology got caught up in QAnon, which Good, Wilcock, and Sather promoted? It seems there are two camps, well-reasoned UFO experts, investigators, and followers who take a more or less scientific approach, and then a whole bunch of gullible folks or loons. How did it get so bad, and what caused this, do you think? As far as stuff like QAnon, I think that comes down to people wanting answers. They want simple answers to complex questions, and stuff like that provides those in one sense. But also there's just this general mistrust of the government at this point, and that's entirely the government's fault. And I think that's even where things like the flat earth stuff comes from, because we've been lied to so many times about so much stuff that people just don't want to believe any of it anymore.
Right. You know, so with QAnon particularly, I feel like because it's become such a catch-all, it's almost a container for anyone that wants to influence people that are very on that scale of desiring answers.
Yeah.
Somebody, Cassius and I in the Discord were talking about Scientology had been sort of like moving into Q circles.
Oh, interesting.
But, you know, it would not surprise me if we found out, you know, as Q has gotten more decentralized and all these things over the years, that think tanks and businesses and people trying to make money here or there have injected their little spin on whatever Ron Watkins put out that time and use it to manipulate things in different ways.
Yeah, well, and correct me if I'm wrong, and I could very well be wrong, but the whole QAnon thing is like all the quote unquote information surrounding that is disseminated through like anonymous 4chan posts, right?
Yeah.
So it could very well be totally different people just having a laugh.
Yep, exactly. So you can have all kinds of agents, bad actors, different countries. I really do think that the think tank and that sort of like place where faith movements and businesses start to cross over with something like Scientology have probably used that sort of container to inject ideas out there in the last year or so.
I also wonder how much QAnon may be an experiment to a degree. Like how much, you know, because there was one point where they said Kennedy was someone asked if Kennedy was still alive. I forget which one.
Yeah.
And they said, no, he's dead. And then like a week later said, oh, if you want to meet him, he'll appear at, you know, like this place or whatever. And people went there and the people are like, so they literally told you two different things and people are still listening to them. And so I wonder how much is an experiment of like, what can we get away with? How much can we manipulate some people?
Sure. I think a lot of it has to do with the medium, honestly. And maybe this is the fact, like coming from, you know, my academic background, quote unquote, is in media studies. And I'm a big Marshall McLuhan, you know, advocate in terms of trying to read media. And I think that a lot of the behavior that you're seeing here, and even like, you know, the memes and the tropes or whatever you want to call them, you know, that are being pushed around, this isn't new. Like, this is something that we've been seeing. You've seen this throughout history in different, you know, ways of cons and cults and groupthink. But it's the medium, like how information is disseminated and what people digest and how it's, you know, the scope of it, the scale of it is like nothing that we've seen before. And absolutely. I think it's like, what can we do? What can we do with this? You know, like the sky's the limit. Let's test out, as many things as possible. I would believe that there's all sorts of crazy stuff going on right now that we can't even imagine, that people are trying out or trying to think of how to exploit for power, lulls, or money.
Yeah.
Ah, the lulls.
And it said the last part of it was how did it get so bad and what caused this. And I think the two things, building on what you just said, Chris, one of them is the medium. It's the social media. And the other thing is, like I said, the distrust of the institutions, of the scientific institutions, the governmental institutions. The government lies about everything, even if it doesn't have to, because it's going to twist it to use it as propaganda. And they are very, very good at it. It's every government. It's not, one government. It's just what governments do.
It's all of them. Yeah.
It is all of them.
And it's sort of a combination of the two, of the medium itself and that distrust, because the environment that we're in, breeds this sort of isolation between different ideologies and causes so many competing ideas of what is true that all of a sudden people are looking down, different corners and don't have any idea what's consensus anymore.
Yeah.
To add to all of that, to go back to the medium aspect, the internet makes things so interesting because instead of having one or two sources to find an answer, a textbook, an encyclopedia,
right,
research journal, there's more information than you could possibly sift through.
Yeah.
With a reasonable amount of effort for just about any topic you could choose. And so when you take that distrust, you take the medium, and then you take this methodology of we're going to leverage the fact that you cannot look at all of this stuff and make a value judgment on how you feel about it. We'll steer you with that. I have a family member that used to work in public education. And when they would talk about changes in public education policy for stuff they wanted to get passed, passed like a school board or something like that, they would save all of the documents until the night before the meeting and send out like 300 or 400 pages, which no one would have a chance to
read
go
through. Yeah.
And the internet kind of works like that with every topic now.
Yeah.
And to that point, Saxon, it can lead you down a particular kind of path, or the other end of that. And I think this is sort of what's happened with me in the last couple of years, is it can just lead you away from all of it. And unfortunately, I've become very poorly informed about many, many things, because what do you trust? What of the many biased news sources are going to be the one I want to grab my information from?
Right.
So I just get my information from people I know in real life, and it leads to me being woefully uninformed about a lot of stuff.
Right.
I bet you're a lot more sane daily, though.
Yeah.
Yes, I think so. Well, I'm crazy, but I mean that's a totally separate thing.
Different thing. Yeah.
So
the amount of anxiety that I think that you can get rid of when you just turn some of these faucets of information and spin off is incredible.
Also, you have the fact that humans by nature are very tribal.
Yes.
And this, in a sense, I mean, to me, I feel like that's 99% of the problems in the world. Because we gather to groups rather than treating everyone equally. Even if we're trying, it's very hard to turn off that tribalism. And now you have the powers that be utilizing that tribalism to keep people separated so that they stay in power, because that's really their only interest, is staying in power. Yep. They want to stay on the top. They really don't care about anything else. And they've learned that turn the people against each other. And it's not hard to do,
Yep.
And that's exactly
it's not at all.
All right. Let's move on to the next one, which is a very easy one. He says, Soraya, did you ever get this is still good at wine. Soraya, did you ever get the crystal from Jeff Ritzman that he placed upon his forehead, prompting wild paranormal experiences? Unfortunately, no. That was, because I told Jeff I would totally put the crystal against my forehead. That would have been fantastic. Even if nothing happened, just to see, as an experiment. But I never actually got to meet Jeff in person, unfortunately. The last time, not the last time I went to Albatwitch, but the last time I went when Jeff was alive, that's where I met you in person, Chris.
That's right.
And Jeff was supposed to come out, but then his son had some kind of medical issue, and it just never happened.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Y'all try to catch up for some metal shows too, and that got interrupted, I think, right?
I think that was the same night. I think we were going to do Alba Twitch, and then we were going to go to Baltimore and see One Eyed Doll.
Nice.
Because that was one of the few newer bands I had gotten him into, and I'm going, they're playing Baltimore the same night as Alba Twitch, and he was definitely interested, but I don't get the impression Jeff was a super public person.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think like it might have also been a little overwhelming for him. Like it was like, oh, I want to do this, but do I want to do this? And I think a lot of us can understand that.
Sure.
Oh, for sure.
It's like, yeah, that sounds great. Wait, that means I got to be around a lot of people for a long time.
I saw a term floating around on Instagram the last couple of days that was, one of these sort of like feel-good news stories, but the topic was whatever this term is, that's the joy of canceled plans.
Yes.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Yeah, you're like, oh, I don't have to go do that now.
Yeah.
Well, with me, it's always like, oh, yeah, I definitely want to go to that concert. And then the day of the concert, it's like, why am I going to this concert?
Yeah.
And I generally don't regret going, but it's just kind of like, now I got to leave the house and go to a concert. Yeah. But so the last one from Good at Wine was, oh, no, it's not the last one. So the next one was, where is Ren? He's so great. Love him on the show and miss him. Ren's around. He got very busy with life, and he will be back on the show. At least I can say that. Unlike Steph, where I have no idea what happened, I have talked to Ren, and Ren is totally down to come back on the show. I just haven't gotten around to setting up a show with him yet. So Ren will be back.
Can confirm he is alive.
He's in the underworld. He's researching the underworld, and he's there right now.
Do you really think all those things happened to Whitley Strieber? It's just so much. Personally, I believe the accounts detailed in Communion and a couple of his subsequent books, but after that, things seem a bit hard to believe. Having said that, he's always been believable in interviews. By the way, and conversely, Jeff Ritzman is someone who had tons of experiences, and I believe every one of them. I wonder what the difference is.
It's interesting.
I don't disbelieve Whitley. We do have to remember that Whitley was hypnotized to remember some of the stuff. I think the stuff I had the hardest time with was the Master of the Key stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So much of his other stuff was hypnotism. But yeah, I don't think Whitley is lying, but I do think Whitley is, he's a writer. He knows how to present things. So I think he first of all, the fact that he was a horror fiction writer immediately put him in that marginal category. People didn't believe him because they thought he was just making it up. Right. Which is part and parcel of the paranormal. Versus Jeff Ritzman, who was not great at necessarily presenting his stuff. I mean, he was well-spoken and stuff, but it wasn't so curated like Whitley's was. Whitley was going on national television talking about his stuff. Jeff was just very down-to-earth, just telling his story. So I think that's why Jeff's comes, I believe everything that happened to Jeff as well. But I think that's why Jeff comes across as more believable, because it wasn't curated a little bit. And I think Whitley has made his stuff more easy to digest to people.
Yeah.
I think with, it's an interesting dichotomy between them. I think I didn't know either of them. I don't know Whitley and I didn't know Jeff, but listening to their stories, I agree. I think I would believe the things that happened to Jeff pretty much wholeheartedly. Yeah. And a lot of that comes down to the way he told the stories and the fact that he was very, down to earth about it. But also it's sort of like this, I don't know what you describe it as, but like it's almost like his own personal disbelief of the whole thing while kind of like knowing that he's gone through it, but also feeling like this is preposterous, right? Like this whole thing is just preposterous. But with Whitley, I believe that he believes what he, has claimed.
Oh yeah.
And maybe he did experience it the way that he claims it, but I think a lot of it may be, not a lot of it. I think at least parts of it might be more symbolic in ways that affected him profoundly. But I don't know. I'm not him, and I haven't lived his experience.
The thing that also makes me question the whole Master of the Key thing, someone had written an ebook, I think it was, and I cannot find it for the life of me. I know he sent it to me, and I actually wanted to have him on to talk about it, but it was a critical look at the key, and one of the things he noticed is that a lot of it mimicked stuff in Michael Talbot's holographic universe stuff. Almost word for word in some cases, and Whitley was a good friend of Michael's. And so it doesn't mean that he necessarily was lying, but maybe subconsciously this fed through, maybe whatever experience he had was more of a subconscious thing than actual information.
Yeah. Whitley Strieber seems, for somebody that I have never met, seems like someone that lives very much, and people say this in a pejorative way of like, with their head in the clouds or daydreamer, but I think he the way in which he engages with the physical world or sort of the imaginal world seems to me to be, different than maybe a lot of people. And it makes sense. The person, he's a creative, he's a writer. And I think that in that sense, sometimes, fiction and or imagination and reality get blurred. But that also doesn't necessarily mean these things aren't real, because how much of it is, as we were saying earlier, partially self-generated.
Yes.
So,
yeah. This is a bit of a stretch of a connection, but sometimes some of the stuff around Whitley, the mechanisms and things remind me of Philip K. Dick.
Yeah, I could see that.
Where you've got this person who's an author that writes horror fiction compared to like PKD doing science fiction and everything else.
Yeah.
Who have also started to have these like very unusual experiences. It almost makes me think of some of the stuff that Jeff Kripal talked about, where, when you're writing these stories and things like that, like you're almost writing yourself and it starts to influence your reality.
Right. Yeah.
And so I don't know, that kind of comes back over to what Chris just said too about, he lives in maybe a bit more of an imaginal reality than the rest of us too.
Sure.
All right. So the next one, these are still from Good at Wine, because they did throw some really good questions to us. Yeah, there's this one that a few people asked. When's your book coming out? Is it close to being finished? And did Jeff Ritzman ever finish and publish the book he was talking about? Okay, so I'll address the second part first. Jeff was not done with the book. And I talked to Jeremy Vaney about it because he was one of Jeff's best friends and friends with his family. And apparently his family has no intention of publishing what was there. So I guess what you got is, the stories he's told about his experiences on podcasts like mine and Project Archivist, and of course his own Paratopia. But there won't likely be a book from Jeff, unfortunately. And hopefully, I'm not going to die before I finish mine, because no, mine's not close to being finished. I had originally read through everything a few years ago, all the notes I took, and made notes from them. And then Mike Clellan said, well, what was happening in your life when these things happened? And I went, I don't know. And now I've had to go through with all new eyes and do it again. Also, the initial idea with the book is I was just going to put down the paranormal stuff. But now looking at it, I can't just put down the paranormal stuff because everything's sort of intertwined.
Right.
So I'm weeding through it, trying to put down the important points, both paranormal and not. And a lot of people are also interested in all the music stuff. So it's more of an autobiography than a paranormal book at this point, but the focus is on the paranormal stuff. And I'm up to 1992. So it's going to be a while. My life is very, very busy. And I don't find a lot of time where I can sit down and actually write, because there's so many things going on. And I'm always playing catch up with everything. I did write quite a bit in the last month. But again, a lot of it's reading through and going, that's not, I don't need anything from that. But I wrote a lot early on. And it was the way I processed all that stuff. And throughout the years, I continued to do that. But like the earliest stuff, I also had the most time. And as, life went on, I was doing more and more stuff and had less and less time to write. So at a certain point, it's going to speed up. But I hope to maybe get it done this year. That would be great. I'm almost considering doing the new theories book first, just because it'll be shorter. And I'd like to get it out, like looking at all the alternative theories for all the different paranormal stuff. But when I asked, everyone wanted the autobiography first. So when's the book coming out? I don't know. Hopefully soon. But yeah, I really can't answer that question.
Got a working title?
No.
Fair enough.
Yeah, it's going to be one of those things that the title will probably come after I'm done with it, because I'm learning so many new things about my own life and experiences and attitudes towards things. I'm like, it's really fascinating to me.
Yeah.
Because again, before I pretty much skimmed through it looking for the weird stuff, and now looking at it at a deeper level, I'm going, oh yeah, that's interesting, and that's interesting. And I'm really glad I wrote all this stuff down. Now to just,
I hope you have like a subtitle of like Black Metal, Kundalini, and the Anomalous.
Well, there you go.
I would buy that right now.
Yeah, and it's like, it's also, as I'm finding, like, there's stuff I need to deal with as I'm reading through it, like remembering these things happen and being like, oh, you know, and like, how does that make me feel now? And having to kind of re-deal with some of it, you know, from a different perspective than the way I was dealing with it then. So, again, I totally recommend people keep records of stuff that happens to them, because it is interesting and it is therapeutic in the long run. If nothing else, plus if you do have weird stuff happening to you, you have a record of it.
Yeah, it is very helpful.
Dreams especially, because it's very easy to misremember something, or even in little bits where you're like, oh, this was this. And I also feel a little validated when I have a memory and the stuff I wrote explains the part of the memory that doesn't seem right.
Mm-hmm.
So, for instance, when the name Soraya was spoken into my head, we were coming back from seeing the Scorpions and Trickster. And
Nice.
so, like, my friend was driving, his sister was in the front seat, my friend was asleep next to me in the back seat, and I remember driving past this town, Willard, and that's where the name got said very loudly into my head. And I'm thinking about it going, but my friend lived right there. Why weren't we dropping her off? Like, that doesn't make any sense. Like, her house literally was right there. But I'm like, something is wrong with that memory. And when I looked through what I wrote down, she had actually come to my house before the show. Her car was at my house, which is why we didn't stop at her house, because we had to take her back to my house so she could get her car. And I'm like,
Sure, okay.
So my memory was right. Okay, I feel a lot better about that.
Yeah, you know, your mind will try to correct those things.
Yes, absolutely.
You know, I totally agree with you on that.
But I feel good that my memory did not correct that, you know?
Right. Yeah.
It's like it didn't make sense, but it did once I had more of the picture. And again, that's why I'm glad I wrote everything down. So I may release bits of it to Patreons as I get some of the chapters proofread. So at least there'll be something out there. Again, hopefully I'll get it done before I die. That's my goal. And the last one from Good at Wine was, is there a surefire technique or ritual you or any of your guests have used to have paranormal encounters? No.
Nope.
Yeah, not at all.
I mean, again, the one that I've always said sounds the most reasonable to me is Ritzman's.
Yes. Yeah.
Not Greer's.
Things like meditation help too, and you know, doing rituals and stuff, things that connect with you. But it doesn't mean anything's going to happen. There's no guarantee. If there was, we could study it a lot easier.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. You know, I've thought a lot about a lot of the more like psychic experiences I had in my adolescence, and I didn't understand that there were psychic experiences at the time, I suppose. And it was just like watching myself do things. And, you know, other than that, everything was mundane. And then I would just know something. And it was like watching myself talk about something that I didn't look up, but I obviously knew about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. Well, and I could say, I mean, you know, as far as like rituals and stuff like that, there are definitely things that can happen when you do, you know, stuff. And it doesn't have to be a magical ritual. It could be some kind of whatever intention setting, or like Ritzman, you know, kind of going out and sort of sitting with or being ready in that kind of a way. I've had things happen. I've had strange, anomalous things happen in conjunction with or around rituals, but never consistently.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd say, for anybody that it really is looking for a way to try to, make things happen, beyond meditation, I mean, you could do a specific rite like the bornless rite, the headless rite, which you can find, around. It's a very common one, or the lesser banishing ritual. These are sort of common, spells. Or you could just do Austin Osman Spare, Grant Morrison simple sigil. Try it all. I mean, do the Ritzman thing. Like try several things. But keep trying.
And Spare would often use sexual fluids to enhance his, which seem to hold some element of power, as does blood for whatever reason.
That does, and that is something that's pretty. I mean, if you don't have to have sort of empirical evidence, and there probably even is empirical evidence, that's been going on for that's really like old deep tantra right there.
Yeah.
And it's also the basis of a lot of the secrets of these occulted ritual magic orders. When it gets down to it, it's sex magic.
Yeah,
true.
And for what it's worth, the craziest. The craziest anomalous stuff that's happened to me in conjunction with rituals have been totally unrelated to anything like super heavily planned. Like the first thing, was more or less a goetic summoning that was completely just totally haphazardly done with no preparation and none of the correct equipment. And, I feel that it resulted in what happened a couple weeks later, which was the entire house becoming infested with giant flies.
Right.
And the other thing was a little rite I'd found as a devotional to Hecate on the internet. And I did that. It was a very kind of short spell or prayer or whatever you want to call it. And I put the candle out, went to bed, and there was a couple hours before I went to bed, but woke up at 3 a.m. and the candle was burning. And that remains to this day the number one thing that I look at as being actually like psychic or unexplained.
Mm-hmm. That is fascinating.
Yeah, that's okay. And you mentioned Tantra. There's a book that I just I had borrowed it from the library back in '91, and it had a pretty strong effect on me. And I think I told the story where I tried to buy this, and like on Amazon, it sold for like $600.
Yeah, right.
And I was like, nope, that's not happening. And then I did an internet search and found it from some bookstore for like $6. It was like, oh, perfect. And then it just like disappeared, and they refunded my money with no explanation. And then I had to find another copy of it also for $6 and actually got that one. But I read through the first couple of chapters, and I had written down a couple of quotes that I really liked out of it. And it says, Tantra is not a withdrawal from life, but the fullest possible acceptance of our desires, feelings, and situations as human beings, which is something I very much like, because I think there's too much, especially with religion, about like living for the next world and not living this life, and, appreciating what you have in this existence. And then the other quote I put down was, one question often asked whether Tantra is a religion or a form of mysticism. Tantra is from its very nature an encyclopedic science. It is practical and has no concern with worldly warfare. It lights the torch and shows the way step by step until the sojourner comes to the end of his journey. Although it appears to be a mystic way based on the metaphysical concepts, yet in the last analysis, Tantra practice sheds its mysticism and becomes a verifiable experience to the one who seeks. Insofar as it is based on human experience and the very act of living as a source of the amplification of consciousness, the Tantric method is a scientific approach. In its strictest sense, Tantra is neither religion nor mysticism, but it is an empirical experimental method which is absorbed as a cultural pattern valid for everyone and not limited to any exclusive group or sect.
Yeah.
Wow, I love that.
Yeah.
It's tech. I mean, it's tech.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, 100%.
And it's not.
You know,
it's also not just sex magic. That's the other thing. The book covers the science and all this other stuff around it. That's just a piece of it.
Completely.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Saxon.
Oh yeah. I was kind of collecting my thoughts there on this. I was reading Ultra Culture years ago, and as you get into the foreword, the author just basically says like, "You're God. You're not a god. You're God. So what are you going to do?" But it was very much like that idea of grounding that, experience the reality that you live in now, the way you want to. And, invite the experiences that you want in, all that kind of stuff. And I try to remind myself of that now and then because it keeps me a little bit more open to possibility.
Yeah. Life is to be lived and enjoyed. I mean, it's not all good and it's not all bad. It's an experience.
Yeah.
So, all right. So Tony Pepperoni asks, what is your theory on what happened to people who disappeared under strange and seemingly paranormal circumstances, such as the missing 411 or Henry McCabe? I've been so incredibly fascinated by those type of cases because of the supernatural element they have, such as strange coincidental weather changes of some sort, finding the missing person in a previously searched area, and also finding missing people in areas that are not humanly possible to reach due to factors such as terrain or weather conditions. So when it comes to the missing 411 stuff, I think the problem with David's stuff is that he is too inclusive. Because I think what you have is a lot of different stuff happening here. And if you've actually read David's books, you'll find a lot of the cases are just kind of like, they seem like they probably have prosaic information or explanations, but there's just not enough information. And he starts, especially after like the second book, he starts really just adding everything in that even remotely connects. So I don't know how well his patterns hold up, aside from the fact that a lot of this stuff happens in the wilderness with granite and stuff like that. And I think that stuff can have an effect on us and on our reality. And Walter Bosley talked a little about his theory of where the telluric currents meet are actually the same places where you find spats of disappearances.
Yeah. Well, you have that, and you have water moving nearby too.
Right.
And,
right.
Lots of interesting elements coming in.
And there's definitely paranormal stuff going on with some of this. I mean, there's so much Fae legend talking about this stuff. And I should be having someone on somewhat soon talking about just that, the elements of Fae stuff in missing people encounters. The weather thing, this always bugged me because David would cite, well, these people disappear and then there's bad weather. But most of these places can have sudden bad weather. And I would think that the problem finding the people would be because the bad weather hit, like it's not like what's the cause effect here? Is it that the person going missing has disrupted weather patterns, which is not impossible, or more likely bad weather just happened to strike at a bad time, which is what made the person hard to find.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. No, that's a good point. It's an interesting correlation to make it all, like to try to point it out because of the sort of historical association with things like the Fae. But no, you raise a good point.
I mean, you definitely have these cases where you have like a 2-year-old kid found, 2 mountaintops away, in a very short period of time where there's no way they could have walked there. In recent times, we had the Casey, I forget his last name now, but who disappeared in North Carolina in below freezing temperatures and, came back unscathed and said a bear took care of him.
Right.
That reeks of something very odd happening because that's, a bear isn't going to take care of him, and he should have been dead from hypothermia. Also, I don't think people understand, like David doesn't seem to understand hypothermia and paradoxical undressing very well. Hypothermia, your body temperature only has to drop to like 95 degrees before you'll start experiencing hypothermia. So you can get hypothermia in the summer in the right conditions. It's not just something that happens when you get cold, and the paradoxical undressing happens fairly quickly after that as your body tries to heat itself, moving more blood to your core. And so then you feel like you're too hot because your body is literally shutting down trying to preserve its warmth, and you start taking off clothes because you think you're too hot. And you're not thinking right because your system is being, stressed. That said, as far as the paranormal stuff, I mean, we got portals, which people have encountered. In fact, I remember Steph Young had a story where the guy encountered this portal in the middle of the wilderness, and he just felt something weird there. When he reached forward, his hand would disappear into it. And he was like, nope, not going in there, you know. But
and little did he know, his hand appeared in some other forest at some other point in time
yeah, probably.
as a disembodied hand.
Yeah, exactly. You know, there's so much. I think the forests in particular, there's a lot going on there, and a lot of stuff that has inspired the whole Fae sort of culture. That's very real. I mean, it may not be literal fairies, but there's something out there. There's probably some level of intelligence to it, as well as just weird environmental things that we don't see in cities and stuff like that. We're more tapped into stuff too when we're in the wild, but a lot of the weirdest experiences I've had have been in places like forests and you know, away from the city. You don't get tons of paranormal stuff happening in urban areas.
I always wonder if, you know, we have stories about time slips and things like that where people walk around a corner and they're transported 40 years back or something like that. What happens when you don't go back the way you came in?
Yeah.
And is that sort of, I guess that kind of gets back to you talking about the portals and things like that. But I've always wondered if a lot of the truly paranormal disappearances are something along those lines too.
And when you have, like Patrick Harper had sent me a story about a woman who was caught on a ferry hill, and any way she walked, she would just end up going back the other direction. Like she'd just get turned around. And people were out looking for her, and she could see them and hear them, but they couldn't hear her, and she couldn't get to them because anytime she tried to leave the hill, she ended up walking back up the hill.
Wow.
And eventually, whatever was keeping her there just stopped, and she was able to leave. And of course, you know, let's imagine that she, you know, I don't know, died of exposure up there. The people looking for her, maybe she wanders off the hill and collapses, and then the people looking for her are going to be like, well, we searched there, and she wasn't there. You know, which is what you're seeing is that, you know, areas that are thoroughly searched suddenly, oh, there they are. How did they get there? There are some really strange cases in the 411 books where, like, this woman talks about she was walking along, I think, a trail she was fairly familiar with, and she was just lost. And this has happened to Timothy Renner as well, walking through, I think, Site 7, actually. And it's called being Fae-led, where you get disoriented and such, and you know the area, but suddenly you don't know the area.
Right.
And she said there were people there, but anytime she tried to talk to them, they'd hide. Or something to that effect. And I thought, that's really weird, you know?
Oh, yeah.
And there was another one where these two kids were walking their property or whatever, and they got lost on their own property, and they're like, we don't know where we are. And, you know, their parents came out, they're yelling for them, and they never heard them. And finally, they kind of realized, oh, wait, now this looks familiar. And they came back out, and they couldn't figure out where they had been, and they never heard anything.
Yeah, and I mean, it's entirely possible that it's just, I mean, that it's a large piece of woods, and they've never been there before. But that type of stuff is so prevalent in folklore.
Yeah, and especially when you're on your own property, you know it, you know. It's almost like you're slipping realities a little bit.
Yeah.
At the same time, there was a case that we talked about that would have been a missing 411 case if the woman had not survived, where it had all, like, if this woman had not survived, it would have had it would have ended up in one of David's books. And that's the thing. So she had been attacked. She was jogging, and she stopped at a rest area, like, a toilet or whatever. And this guy followed her in and basically said, I'm going to rape and then kill you. And she got away from him and with her dog. She had her dog with her. And she took off. And even though she knew the area, she took off in a direction through the woods that she didn't know. And she got thoroughly lost. So apparently the dog, when they went out looking for her. She couldn't figure out how to get back. They went out looking for her, and the dog comes back. And that's one of the things, you know, David will say, oh, the dog came back, but they can't find the person. And that's what happened in this case. The dog went back, and she didn't, you know, she got separated from the dog or whatever. They did eventually find her, but way off where they thought she was going to be because they didn't expect her to be running from someone who was trying to harm her.
Right.
Wow.
So that stuff does happen, too. So it's very hard to kind of like pin down what's paranormal, what's not. I mean, there's some things that are impossible. Like I said, like the kid showing up 2 mountaintops away without any, like, you know, like if a bird of prey picked it up or something, they would have had claw marks and stuff like that in them. But when they die from exposure 2 mountaintops away, well, how did they get there? So, yeah, I think there's a lot of explanations. Some of them mundane and some of them not, but it's really hard to kind of break it down and figure out which is which.
So the thing with the dogs finding their way back is, I've always kind of heard that, like, a dog can always sort of find its way home. Is that like a pretty well-known thing that
Yes.
dogs are good navigators?
Oh, yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
In fact, a lot of animals are in general. I have a lot of mice here, and I won't kill them if I don't have to, so I put out live traps. And it'll say when you do the research on it, it's like if you don't take them at least 2 miles away, they will find their way back.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a small little mouse, you know.
Right.
So if anyone's seen any of the pictures of Seneca Lake I've been posting, I've actually been taking them out to Sampson Park, State Park, when I catch them. And, of course, it's always like 2 a.m. It's like, oh, mouse. All right. And then I stop and take cool pictures because everything looks awesome.
Of the park or of the mouse?
Of the lake, usually.
Gotcha. Okay.
Like I posted a video on Facebook the other day. It was like -4 out in the wind chill. I was dying. But the moon was it had the whole lake lit up, and it was really wavy because it was so windy. And I'm just like, I need video of this. So,
Man, -4.
yeah.
You New Yorkers have it easy.
I know, right? What do you get up there? Like -30?
Yeah, I think we had like -15 over the past couple weeks, but it's been in the 30s recently. Sorry, not to get on a weather tangent.
Nice, brisk, warm 30 degrees.
It's been -30 before here, and a friend of mine got stuck in a snowdrift just down the road, and I walked down with a shovel. It was -30 with the wind chill, and I'm pretty sure my eye was starting to freeze. Like it was hitting one side of my face, and I'm going, okay, my eye feels weird. Is my eye freezing?
As we say here, oofta.
Oofta? Okay, we got a few minutes left. Let's see, what else do I have that's quick? We're going to have to do a part 2 to this because there's a bunch of stuff to talk about here. Someone, Frank Fingerman, also asked when's my book coming out. Yeah, soon, I hope. This is a good one. Wizard Jake. Has anyone tried singing or playing music to entice a Bigfoot? If they are some kind of spirit that feels like a good way to entice it out. I don't know. Anyone else know of anyone? I know they've played what they think are Bigfoot calls, but I've never thought about music.
Yeah, this would be a good Josh question or Tim. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I absolutely think that's the way to go. Write a Bigfoot song.
Yeah, it seems like it would invite something like that, but I don't know of anybody that's actually done it.
Yeah, I'm not sure either.
And what kind of music do you play?
Right. Yeah, right. I would sit there and try to think of something that would be like a very Fae type, song or something like that, and they would probably be completely wrong.
Right. Play something very ethereal.
Yeah.
Smooth jazz.
Smooth jazz. The tall man prefers country and western.
Maybe some Justin Bieber, although I don't know if you want to see what responds to that.
Yeah.
Oh,
They
God.
come find you and hurt you for that.
Exactly. And show up just to shut you up.
Yeah. Oh my God.
Fine, look, it's me, Bigfoot. Turn it off.
Yeah.
But I mean, I had the one experience, which it's one of those, like, I'm sure this is just in my head, but it doesn't seem like it is, where I was sitting at the cliff overlooking Seneca Lake one day, and I just started humming the end of Fate's Warning's Epitaph, which is just this melodic piece, and it started sort of mimicking it on the wind.
Ooh, that's cool.
And I was just like, is that happening? And then so I'd hum it again, and it would hum back to me, and I'm just like, I have no idea how to explain this. This is just weird.
Oh, that's really neat.
But it's one of those things where, like, I'm hearing it, but I'm like, is it just in my head? Like there was no one else there to bounce it off of. So,
go ahead, Sry. I'll say this after.
Go ahead.
His question reminds me a little bit of some of Jeff Ritzman's ideas too, where, trying different methodologies to either like entice something to happen or, Jeff was a person that got my head around thinking about, like, would you investigate a Bigfoot sighting like a paranormal event where, oh, let's go out, let's check the magnetic field here and those kinds of things. Like, has anybody done that? I don't think so.
Well,
but it seems,
Gwendolyn,
why not?
Gwendolyn had pretty good luck creating glyphs on the ground when they were Bigfoot hunting.
Ah, okay.
And one of the shows she was on, she talks about that, and so the strong response that scared the hell out of everyone, and everyone went running.
Well, yeah, that'll do it.
So, I mean, it's definitely, I think this stuff works crossing over lines, and that's been the problem so long, is that we always look at this stuff as separate, but I don't think it's necessarily separate. I don't think it's the same thing in every case. But in saying that, I also don't think every cryptid encounter has the same explanation, even if it's paranormal. The same with UFOs. I think there's a lot of different stuff, including a lot of different paranormal stuff, that just seems similar but is different.
Right.
So I don't think there'll ever be a unified field theory of all the paranormal stuff. I think the only unified factor is that we're experiencing it. Do one more, I think. Matt from Delaware, again, asked how my books are coming. Yeah, okay. And is there a topic or area of research you want to explore more in the show in 2022? I don't know. I mean, I guess whatever strikes me is I don't have any particular planned stuff where I'm like, ooh, I want to talk more about this. I'm glad I got a little more of the ancient mystery stuff in the last year. I kind of like to keep it as diverse as possible. So yeah, I don't think there's any particular thing. As long as I keep it mixed up so that, we cover a lot of different stuff, everything from the occult to ancient mystery to lost history to, the paranormal and everything else. I just don't want it to be the same show week after week.
Yeah.
And keep finding new interesting people to talk about, talk to this stuff about, talk to about this stuff. Words are hard sometimes.
Yeah. Although I will say the show is going back to what you were talking about earlier with, life is meant to be lived. The show definitely has that in its DNA, Soraya, and I always appreciate that because, every episode there's something that I pick up that I'm like, okay, I'm going to go read about this now, or go do some searching about another topic that, Walter Bosley happened to mention offhand or something. And I'm like, okay. Right. Yeah, and I love that. It makes everything a little bit more vibrant.
Yeah, and I mean, people will ask, like, what guests you want to have on and stuff, and like, one of the only people that when I started, I had 3 people I wanted to have on. I figured the show was not going to be successful. Like, I want to take a deep dive into this stuff. I don't know how many people actually would appreciate that, because it seemed like a lot of people like the pop culture approach. And so, but at least if I get to talk to Graham Hancock, Robert Schock, and Andrew Collins, I'll be happy. And I had 2 of them on. I've never had Graham on. I have talked to Graham, and he told me he would come on when his latest book came out, which was a few years ago, and I never wrote him about it. But, when I look at that, as much as I admire Graham Hancock, and, I mean, he got me into podcasting and everything else indirectly, I don't feel like a conversation with him is going to necessarily bring up anything new that he hasn't already talked about. So it's like he's done so many interviews and he's talked about so much of this stuff and he's so well-spoken that I feel like it would just be, bits and pieces. You could listen to other interviews and get the same stuff. I'm not sure I could provoke a new thing out of Graham as much stuff as he has out there. He's also done so much and talked about so much. It's like, I still like to talk to him, but it's no longer like a big deal to me because I'd rather talk to someone who is going to inspire me to think in new ways. And Graham already did that. Yeah. The same with Whitley Strieber. I mean, he's out there so much. He's done so many interviews. I'm not sure anything novel would come of having him on.
I guess I've got sort of an idea in the opposite realm of that. And this is probably something very difficult to try to do. But I remember a while back you had done an interview with Joseph Fink, the creator of Welcome to Night Vale.
Yeah.
And I thought it was a really interesting interview because he's not really like a part of this paranormal world. Like, his show definitely has elements that draw from it, but him, personally, he seemed to have a very different kind of viewpoint around it.
Yes.
And
yeah.
I would be fascinated to see more, interviews with people who are not necessarily like in it, but are maybe on like outside perspectives,
Right,
and
right.
getting their opinions, or especially on some of the more philosophical notions.
Well, and that's why I wanted to have Michael Rutger or Michael Marshall Smith, whichever name he's writing under at any given time, on, because you could tell from reading his books he's at least read the stuff. He had some familiarity with it, but he wasn't. And like his take on the paranormal was very different from anyone's I had ever heard before.
Okay.
And so yeah, that, and when I had I can't remember her name from the Believer podcast on. Same thing. Like I listened to that podcast and I said, okay, this is someone who doesn't have any hostility toward the paranormal. And she's doing a fiction podcast about paranormal subjects. I want to see where she stands on it. I loved that interview.
Okay.
So yeah, I definitely like doing that. I like bringing in people who are not part of the normal circuit of paranormal conversations, and just get some of that outside view.
Yeah.
And I also find it weird, and I've talked about this before, where, like you get so many people who write about paranormal fiction who have no interest in the paranormal, or flat out disbelieve it.
Right. It's unfortunate.
Man, that sounds dull.
Yeah, I don't really get it. Like, why would you write about something you don't believe in?
Right?
Like,
Well, because it makes for great fiction.
well, that's true. That's
But
true.
you're crazy if you believe it.
Yeah.
Or maybe they really do believe it. They'll just never admit it.
There you go.
Right. Yeah.
All right. Well, we're out of time. We're going to have to do a part 2 of the AMA show here at some point. But tell people where people can find you. Let's start with Chris.
You can go to brightrectangle.com or here.
All right. And Taylor?
Eventually, I'll post another episode of the Green Line podcast. Otherwise, yeah, sometimes I'm here.
Okay. And you have your tarot deck, too. Where's that?
That's true. It's sigilarcanum.com. I have to fix the website soon here, but
Okay.
yeah, sigilarcanum.com.
And if you want to talk to Super Inframan, sometimes he's in the Discord.
Yeah, I always monitor the Discord. So if you tag me in anything, I'll be happy to reply to it. And if you really want to track me down, I also lounge around on Instagram now and then.
All right. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I want to take a moment here to give a shout out to all of my Patreons. It's because of you that this show is possible. And a special shout out to those of you pledging $10 or more. Tim, Allison Cook, Super Inframan, Stephen St. George, Andrew Nichols, Matthew Sproul, Christine, The 100th Monkey Project, a blue second-generation MR2 drifting around a Japanese mountain, Patricia Giaquinta, Alex Whitcomb, American Rambler, Andrew Maines, Barbara Fisher, Beverly Williamson, Big Boy Limina, Charles Davis, Charles in Florida, land of the crazy and communicable, Chris Ernst, Chris Johnson, Craig Cicernos, Craig Parmenter, Crystal Ann Compton, David Moore, Denise Sarek, Diane B., Diona Bidwell, Duffy Dowder, Edu Camahort, MTK, Eric Citron, Eric Todd, J. Otto Bullitt, James Lattimore, Joanna Rojas, John W. Bracken, Carla Mahoney, Kevin Schreck, Kristen L., Laser Printer Jam, Linz Jackson K., Luke Osborne, Mark Bowley, Mark Brady, Matt in Delaware, Patricia W., Paul Jeffries, Ray Benedetto, Riker at Stark, Roger Gonzalez, Sam Sharon, Stone Wilderness Tactical Therapist, Taylor Bell, 36 Dingo, Thunderboy, Tyler Glimstead, Vincent Treewell, Walker, Will Gebhard, Will Powell, Ren Collier, Martina Saint, and Stephen D. Thank you all so very, very much. So I still have some AMA questions left. We will deal with those in a future episode. There is a Patreon segment with this show as almost always. It's very rare we don't have a Patreon segment after a show. If you want to become a patron and get extra content almost every week, it's only $3 a month. I feel like you'll definitely get your money's worth if you like the show, and it definitely helps support the show and helps me continue making the show. You can also buy merch off the website That's the wrong website. thelastexit.org if you want to check out my music site. wheredidtheroadgo.com if you want to check out every episode of Where Did the Road Go for the last 9 years, as well as merchandise and links to all our social media and everything else. And that's right. The next show will be the 26th anniversary show. 26th anniversary show. See, I don't even know what I'm talking about. The 9th anniversary show. Technically, the 9th anniversary is a January 26th, but it'll air a little before that or a little bit after that because patrons get the show a week earlier than everyone else. And the week after that will be the UFO History Show with Aaron Gullius and Mike Cleland. Not sure exactly what much has happened in 2021, but we'll talk about what did. And I will see you next time. You have been listening to Where Did the Road Go? This show is made possible in part from our Patreons, and we thank you and everyone listening for helping us continue this exploration of the strange. You can always find everything Where Did the Road Go related at www.wheredidtheroadgo.com. And thank you so much for your support.